Hey, this is Adam Knox, and welcome to another episode of The Cult of You. In this weekly series, I bring you the best interviews and the most interesting ideas out there, but now we're starting something a little bit differently. Since this is the first Wednesday of the month, hopefully, depending on when you're watching this, it may be a bit later. But our new schedule and our routine will now ensure that the beginning of every month gives you a direct sit down between myself and my favorite astrologer, Bill Duvendack, to discuss the month's up and coming major astrological events and what we can do about that. This week we discuss Mercury retrograde and the age or the beginning of Aquarius and its real impact, what we can do, some strategies, some techniques, and some tools. And even if you're watching this outside of that specific period of time, I'm sure you'll still find some more benefit because we go into depth about the psychology behind these things, why a retrograde may impact you and why not. So these won't just be the predictions of the month, even though they are designed to give you tools and strategies by which you may succeed and really work in alignment with those natural forces, but also help you to have a deeper understanding of your own psychology and your own spirituality by taking advantage of the deeper ideas in personal development and spiritual growth, as well as magical tactics that we can discuss. We also, in this episode, will talk about the impacts of where you are on the planet and the appropriate festivals related to that. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this. And remember, this is Adam Knox telling you to live deliciously. Well, it is absolutely fantastic to see you again. Welcome. Glad we can have a monthly guidance through all the storms in the skies and everything. Like the pandemic wasn't challenging enough. Now we've got a retrograde. How are you doing, by the way? Good to see you.
I'm doing good, man. How you doing? It's good to see you too.
It's good. It's good. Looking at it, I find the full moon was a good energy. But I think this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation with you. And thank you so much for deciding that we can do this a little bit more regularly, because a lot of people have been asking or getting confused, I think, with all the information that is out there. There's so many different sources. People are giving so many different ideas. Some of them are relevant to the country that you're in, the demographic that you find yourself in. So to have something, especially for people that I'd like us to chat a bit about both aspects, but we'll get to that. But I'd say for me, going through this pandemic has been exciting, really, because I do a lot of business digitally. So maybe my Mercury is in a better position, but I don't think a lot of other people can handle the retrograde as well.
Yeah, and the retrograde is interesting because you're 100% right. It really depends on what's going on with Mercury in your chart to personalize it. And not everybody is privileged enough to have their birth time, and many people don't even have their birth date. So usually when I'm talking to people about the retrograde, I reverse engineer it. So I'll say, here's an upcoming Mercury retrograde. If it hits you hard, it means Mercury is either in a difficult spot in your chart or it's a prominent role. And if you barely notice it, consider yourself lucky, because it's probably not going to be a factor in general. So you don't have to worry about it like other people do. You hit the nail on the head as to why that is as well.
Well, that's actually very, very interesting, because again, a lot of people just take the generalization, because that's what happens when most people look at their astrological interpretation. And then they go, oh, but this doesn't work. It's not real. But they're not taking this into consideration, which you're raising right now. So time has a major impact on the time of the birth. Exactly. How? But I like this reverse engineering idea. But let's quickly touch on this, because actually let's start our month You know, we've just gone into the retrograde. How about we're now in the first kind of week of February? What are we looking at? What are we dealing with?
So there's good news and bad news with this retrograde. The good news is it's going to be a classic retrograde. And what I mean by that is miscommunications, things that need resolved being brought to the surface to resolve. Anything you might have been suppressing, it's going to come up. And that's because for the year, Mercury is retrograding in air signs, and Mercury is an air planet. Last year, it was in water signs. So it was a lot of the emotional component. And we see how that played out with everything that was going on globally. So each year, Mercury retrogrades in a different element. This year is a good starting point for people to work with it, because whatever comes up is going to be classic. It's going to be miscommunication. It's going to be you stub your toe. It's going to be you never did change the battery in your car and now it dies and it's your own fault because you never addressed it. So it's a good jumping on point. What we can expect for February then is a lot of those classic traits: miscommunication, accidents around the house if you're trying to hurry through things. If you've been putting off dealing with subjects, now it's going to be brought to the surface to deal with. Now, what makes it tricky though is that if someone is born with a Mercury retrograde in their chart, this is probably not going to be a big deal for them because they're used to working with their themes all this life. And the reason I point that out is because I've had some people say, well, I was never really affected by Mercury retrograde, so I thought astrology was bunk, but you're telling me I've been dealing with this all my life. Well, now that I know about it, I'm not any more freaked out because I've been dealing with these things my whole life. Now I just know in the future I can be a pillar of support for those around me that aren't in my position.
That's a golden realization. It's, what is painful in darkness for one individual is just, the daily thing that makes someone else the stronger person that they really are. That's gold. A question then in that sense is Mercury retrograde by itself as an energy, it's a purely obviously a mental force coming into the air element. So communication, that's also internal communication. So if I'm struggling to figure out my plan, or my course of action, and I feel like I'm kind of getting into an inertia, which could be the effect of that retrograde. What do I do? What does somebody do? Is it a case of I step back and I just force myself into clarity? Do I take the right cognitive vitamins? Do I go and banish or do a sacrificial offering to Mercury?
Well, I'm all for sacrificial offerings. Let's start off with that. Some of the most fun ones are Mercury.
Exactly.
But the easy way to handle a Mercury retrograde is meditate, calm the mind. If you hit that mental block like you're talking about, back off from it and shift your focus to something else. Mercury is the planet of adaptability and transmutation. So it gives you that reminder that if you hit a brick wall, it doesn't mean that the solution is to charge through it. It means maybe the solution is to go around it or go above it or go under it. So in that way, brainstorming is very useful. Meditation for keeping your mind nice and level is very useful. But also, and this is really what separates the successors from the failures, let Mercury tell you what you need to address. So for example, if you had a project personally that you're working on and some glitch comes up during the month or during this Mercury retrograde, and you're like, well, that's a problem I'll deal with later. No. The Mercury lesson might be to deal with it now because you put it off for too long already. And that takes a certain level of humility that not everybody has, because when a problem comes up, most people think I'm going to resolve the problem. Well, when it comes up with Mercury, it doesn't necessarily mean resolve it. It's basically holding up a sign saying, look at me, deal with me.
I like that. It's kind of
Yeah.
like I think because the opposite of Mercury in Kabbalah is Samael. It's that poison of God, that, and it can be the negative thinking, can be doubt. So what you're also saying, what I'm hearing is, if you're having that moment of realization during this time where you're like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not doing this, or whatever your negative thought pattern is, this is not a death sentence. This is maybe something unpleasant that you've been repressing and not wanting to acknowledge, and kind of living in the delusion of positive air. And now that negative wind is kind of coming forward, not to say like, listen, you're screwed like this. Here's the problem. Let's deal with it and move on. This is the thing that's in the way to get to where you want to be. Let's get rid of this now while we can. So it's like Tony Robbins talks about emotions, negative emotions are action signals.
Mm-hmm.
Then in this is your retrograde is a pure power action signal on what you don't want to admit necessarily, what you're not really willing to deal with. Is that right?
Yeah, and this is an example I use a lot when I'm talking about Mercury retrograde. Is coming up to a Mercury retrograde, you might think, oh, I had these problems, but I dealt with them. I'm ready to move on. This is going to be my list of things to wrap up during the Mercury retrograde. Fast forward a few days into the retrograde, and somebody says something, and your first thought is, well, I thought we got this resolved. Well, no, obviously you didn't. Either you opened your mouth and inserted your foot, or somebody else had a view that you thought they told you we're over this, and then it comes up proving that no, they're not over it, which means you're not over it either, even though you might want to be.
Yes.
Right. That's the issue. So you're 100% right. You may think, oh, everything in my life is great, and then Mercury retrograde comes along and it brings up all this buried stuff. Well, one type of people would say Mercury retrograde just screwed up my life, when in reality, no, Mercury retrograde said peel the Band-Aid off. We got to get all the pus out of the wound before you can put the Band-Aid back on.
I like that. I think there was a conversation I had with a friend many years ago when we were talking. He was practicing a certain system of magic, and he was practicing the system of magic for something like 5 months. And I sarcastically remarked to him over the phone one day, I'm like, "You must be walking through walls already." And he's like, "Lots of progress, no results." I'm like,
yeah, there's a lot of that. And you brought up an important point too. Part of that side of Mercury is Samael, the poison of God. People should remember that Mercury is not just communication and alchemy and adaptability. Mercury is also the planet that corresponds to tricksters and liars and thieves.
That's a very important, very key idea there.
So sometimes Mercury will prank you. Long story short, an example I use in classes, I don't want to go full in depth now, but I decided to play a game with Mercury a number of years ago during a retrograde, and it came back to bite me in the ass. I was having computer problems. I thought I'm going to resolve it during this Mercury retrograde. I see the computer problem. I know what most likely caused it. I'm ready for it. Then the Mercury retrograde came along and I found out I was wrong in my analysis, and it was much worse than I thought.
Oops.
And it's like, okay, don't play that, don't game the guy.
It's literally the master of the game in this sense.
Right. And he's got a dark sense of humor. So people will be like, how can you say getting in a car accident is a Mercury prank? Well, what were you doing when you got in the accident? Oh, I was checking my phone. He pranked you because you didn't die. You didn't get mangled. You just got the reminder. Don't flip and do that.
It's interesting about that, I like that idea about the dark trickster, because even if you look at people that are in highly intellectual fields like mathematics and technology, they can be almost like a disassociation from that compassion, that emotional body. And it has a degree of sarcasm because it's almost like, are you oblivious to just looking up? And it's gonna bite you if you're not if you're not aware, if you're not paying attention to this, there's a deep lesson here, I think, about value and how we're projecting value and how we're getting attached to the past and stuff like that. But I think that's a conversation for a future discussion. But
For sure.
uh, beyond just the retrograde, as we move into this month, so we need to be, firstly, from what here, we need to be cognizant of these negatives that come up and not be too attached to them, and also not necessarily kind of jump into make any kind of logical planning decisions.
Right.
Or
Exactly. Resolving things is good to do for this coming month, but putting new things in motion, not so much.
okay,
Now, I have had people before say, well, I can't put my life on hold for 3 weeks while Mercury's retrograde. I got to start new stuff. What do I do?
hmm,
And that's where spirituality and one's spiritual and magical tools come in, because you can use a pouch of semi-precious gemstones. You could charge a talisman to carry you through. You could do some sigil work. You can be proactive and still start things, but allow extra time on the back end in case anything comes up. You can still move forward, just not as confidently as when Mercury's direct. So you just got to be very careful and humble.
so maybe if I'm wanting to innovate a new technical venture or a new idea, this is not the best time necessarily for it. But if I've already got something, this might be a good time for me to go rethink through the logic and really identify the logical problems inside of that and bring those up. And they're probably the ones that are good. This is the moment in a project where all the technical problems suddenly reveal itself, and the things that I did not think about are going to come up. So I should really be not making plans for the new. I should be ready for what's there and dealing with that first.
Exactly. And this recording is actually a great example of that. You and I have been having conversations over the last month and working out schedules and figuring out what we want to do. Now we're recording it. So we're putting the final component in place on something that was started before
Hmm.
Mercury retrograded. That's kind of the process here. And I point that out because what's in between the lines here is a lot of this has to do with how you justify things to yourself,
Yeah.
because if you're like, well, I've got a court date that's starting something new during a retrograde, that's going to go horrible. Well, it depends on the court date. If it's going in front of a judge to get a fine reduced, that's not starting something new. That's dealing with something that already existed. It has to do with that self-talk that you mentioned earlier.
Hmm.
I could easily, start writing a new book tomorrow and release it during this retrograde, and people would say, "That's so anti-Mercury retrograde." But if I came up with some bullshit excuse, then no, it would be in line with it.
Okay. Okay. So
It gives us great flexibility. And the way that this ties into February specifically is that this is the month of Aquarius, and all the personal planets in astrology are in Aquarius except for Mars.
interesting. That's interesting. So, which is the action taking force, which in conjunction, this is very interesting. So again, bringing this is not a time to plan new things, but it is an act on them. This is literally time to look at what's been planned, what's been envisioned, and resolve and work through that almost more internally in the team, kind of a thing. That's fascinating. That's an interesting point.
Exactly. And on top of it, Mars is in Taurus. So it's saying do the review, but then formulate an action plan. Put down your steps one by one. How are you implementing it in a daily basis? I just had somebody reach out to me on my emails asking me to contact a spirit on his behalf because he was going through some challenging times, and he said he didn't have a lot of money, so I wasn't giving him like go out and get this tool in this book. It was more like feeling him out. And I said, well, start off with prayer. It costs zero money to pray.
Hmm.
And he came back and said, oh, but I can't do that. I'd rather do that. I'd rather you do that for me. And I had to lay down a boundary with him. And I said, if you're not willing to pray, which costs zero money, I'm not willing to help you
Mm.
because you're too lazy to start the work. You're
Yeah.
using excuses. You're playing the victim card, and I ain't got time for this.
It is, and I think there's a double point in that, because we talk about energy, and your energy is going to attract your stuff. And if somebody's making a statement like that and saying like, "Oh, I cannot even pray. I need you to pray for me," that's an unconscious recognition that they're so deep in survival mode that they're unwilling to even acknowledge that they have any value to offer the universe, not even as simple as a prayer.
Exactly. And that's, I did have to lay down the boundary with that person, but I left the door open. I said, if you pray for a month or so and you still don't have results or you still need some more guidance, let me know.
Hmm.
And what I was emphasizing is exactly what you're talking about. The person has to do something on a daily basis to make it happen. And that's the Mars and Taurus here. Because the problem with February is that Aquarius is an air sign, Mercury's retrograde. So it's going to be a month of being stuck in your head. It's going to be a month of everything cerebral, corresponding to the element of air and the mind. Mars reminds us to come out of our heads and bring it down to physical results. But the way to do it is, how do you bring physical, or how do you make physical results happen on a daily basis in line with your schedule that does not cause you to burn out?
Mm, that's, and also at the same time, there's actually a necessity for that, right? Because if you're not doing that, you're just pretty much. There's a phrase I heard recently that said that outlined that the body's death starts to set in, that aging sets in the second the body's in too much comfort, and it's when we have resistance and we're working with resistance that the body is actually fighting in something that it's going to keep younger and it's going to keep energized. But the second it's too relaxed, too comfortable, it starts to decay, it starts to shut down in certain ways. And
I did not know that. That's fascinating.
very interesting. It's in the book Hacking Immortality from the Alice in Wonderland group. We've spoken about that one before, where they point out that study was part of the study of studying centurions, who people that live over 100 years in these blue zones around the world, and that was one of the principles that they identified. But I think what is so useful of what's being highlighted here, or the way this is being framed, is that if it's an air-based kind of struggle, we've got all these other elements. So this is a really easy time as well for us to feel sorry for ourselves and kind of get stuck in our heads and think that we are powerless, feel almost, especially because that Mars is absent inside of this, feel as if we can't do it. And there's the alignment in Taurus that you mentioned, or that all stubborn bull, in certain ways. Could this then be a revelation of not just that the retrograde is also kind of revealing old habits that are, the stubborn resistance that we have to actualizing and going through that final death and process? Because that's the beauty. We started January for a lot of people that do that, New Year's planning around that time. And, it all seems good for January, and then February hits and you're like, no, I'm not. It's a lot of commitment, and that old habit starts to reveal itself. And now we're stuck with that. And I think makes this retrograde so much more powerful from a growth position if we're willing to do the work inside of that.
Exactly. And to put an even more esoteric spin on it, because this isn't esoteric enough, in Theosophy, Aquarius corresponds to the fifth ray, which is the ray of concrete science and technology.
Oh.
So what that means is this is a good time to reevaluate your own logic, reevaluate your own reason. Look at the tools that you have. One of the things that I've been promoting for a number of years now is that a lot of Ivy League schools in the United States have older courses of theirs online that you can take for free. So some fields like technology change pretty fast, but if you wanted to learn literature, well, you can take a college course of that caliber for free now. So there's no excuse to not become educated.
This is a fact. I mean, even with programming and with technology, right now, I know tons of YouTubers, just as part of their way to market their own business and themselves as freelancers and to prove their competence in new technologies, are putting out free complete courses on the latest technology. And they're literally coming out every single week. Every time on my feed, especially because I'm into technology, I'll constantly see the latest programming language, the latest artificial intelligence network as a complete course. You can go watch it, and you can go self-educate. There's no excuse. Uh,
No, not anymore. If you can afford a phone, you can afford this. It's
exactly.
that simple. Yeah.
Exactly. And if your data is a problem, most coffee shops, are going to be quiet due to COVID, and they'll
Yes, they
have free
are.
Wi-Fi to attract clients. So if you can afford a cup of coffee, you got
Right.
free life. You can.
Exactly. But yeah, the Aquarius. I mean, we had the grand conjunction on solstice in December
Mm.
with Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius. And a lot of people said, is this the beginning of the age of Aquarius? And the short answer is hell no. But now this month is kind of like a part two to that, because that conjunction is still there in a loose sense. And because of the retrograde patterns of Jupiter and Saturn, that conjunction is going to continue to influence us through a lot of 2021.
Mm.
But you've got that grand conjunction last December. Now with February, everything explodes onto a whole new level. It's like that grand conjunction magnified because everything's in Aquarius. So what that means is now is the time for innovation. Now is a time for community, which I see a lot of people ignoring. Now's time for humanitarian efforts. Now's time for modernizing technology
Mm.
and doing things along that line. Now is time for science. So speaking of COVID, it's no surprise that vaccines are rolling out now. We're going to see a lot more both pro and con arguments for it. But anything having to do with this hard logic and reviewing it is really going to be the theme of February. But Aquarius energy is also the energy of being eccentric. So I think a lot of people that we see as public figures, we're going to learn more about them and
Mm.
see that we don't like certain parts of their personality.
That's interesting. I think.
And then the other thing is rebellion. Aquarius corresponds to rebellion. So we might see if COVID lockdowns continue, we might see more and more protests about it. Or we might see in the United States, we might see an extension of what happened on January 6th, or that might come back up on the radar. So it's really multifaceted. The good news is the later we get into the month, the more that starts to cool off.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not going to be like this hypertension level for the whole month. It's only going to continue until about about the 18th of February or so, and then it's going to start to soften. Then it's going to start to bring in the human component of emotions, and you're going to start to get the compassion that you mentioned earlier. That's going to start to slowly migrate in at the end of February, and it's going to really gain traction about the middle of March.
I like how that's kind of coming together, and the way I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong. Uh, we talked about that alignment, that comes in, and part of that, major conjunction represents very much almost the business dimension, that leadership kind of qualities. At the same time, very much our own dark kind of aspects, those Saturnal kind of aspects, which for most people are always kind of separated. My dark secret self versus my professional self. Yet there's an old phrase that I like very much, which Eben Pagan made famous, and he said, "The more personal, the more universal." And it sounds a lot like part of this conjunction, part of what's happening in the planet is where we're coming to recognize, it's the politicians are not going to save us. These people, they can help, they can do their best, but it's us. It's our turn to stop looking at others and start to unlock our own individuality, which this kind of dry, pure intellectual phase of the retrograde is almost like emphasizing, because we're getting more into ourselves, our own head. But it has the risk of the disconnection because we're feeling the lack of that Mars energy. We're going like, oh, it needs to be other people's responsibility. They're not doing theirs. And then there's that bit of a breakthrough that comes, and you said about the 18th, which I think, again, is great. Numerologic, that's 9. Again, number of man, the opening up to our actual humanity and realizing, it is but we're still all in this together. What you raised earlier
Right.
about the community. So it is this perfect time of this duality of our own individuality, but it needs to operate within the collective framework as a community, as people, for it to actually mean something, for us to feel something going forward.
Exactly. And you kind of hit the nail on the head. Now is not the time for finger pointing.
Mm.
I mean, if someone's watching this and they like to finger point, they're the problem, and they're the problem, and they're the problem. I encourage them to stand in front of a bathroom mirror and point that finger there and say, "There's the problem."
Exactly.
It's a technique I did 15 years ago. I did it about 3 or 4 times a week for a year because I was in a situation I didn't like, and I had to remind myself it was my own damn fault for my life choices.
It's such a key idea, because again, like it's so easy for us as people to justify, and oftentimes a person might even be right. It may be that the other person did whatever against you, or it may be that the situation in the country is wrong. That could all be correct, but that philosophy and that psychology still doesn't give you the ability to do anything about it, and simply feeds the situation more and more, keeping you in the reversal of that retrograde. You're not working through it at all. You're just kind of hiding off in your head, adjusting. You're not trying to invoke some Mars and get that energy balanced out, so you can bring it out of the intellectual facility and into the realm of action and mundane manifestation, to be the change that you're looking to see in this world. And not an easy conversation to have, because I think part of that air element, again, like, is it's an intoxicating beauty, our own deluded prison of how grand our concept is to defend ourselves against feeling the things we don't want to feel. How do we
Exactly.
how do we handle that? Since this is pretty much one of the big themes for this month. What are some strategies to do that? This is already a great one. The looking in the mirror and going, like, that's the problem. What are we doing? How can we change? What are maybe some different questions that we should be asking, or things that we should be thinking?
So, number one, you kind of highlighted it with originality and individuality. So, it's good for people to explore how their individual ideas can contribute to the greatest growth and good of all. That's the first thing, is reestablishing that disconnect, because everybody is seeing themselves as isolated or divided, and it's irrelevant how we got there. The fact of the matter is that's where we're at now. And I know a great number of people during this epidemic that are saying, well, I spend most of my time at home anyway. This really hasn't affected me. And that's good, because we need people like that to be there for people that this has really hit in a rough way. So establishing that connectivity with the greater community. The problem is people think the greater community is where you live physically, and that's not always the case for everybody. I'm living in Poland right now. The nation is 97% Catholic. I am not. I am not going to be making any inroads. I'm sorry. It's just not going to happen. So I go digitally. But if somebody's living in like Los Angeles or Chicago or Paris, where it's much more cosmopolitan, they might have some success with that. So that highlights another strategy, which is discernment. Picking and choosing battles is important right now. You got to ask yourself, with every interaction online specifically, is this a hill I am willing to die on? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. Another strategy that can be used is rebelling against yourself. This is the way I've always handled things. Well, guess what? You got an abundance of time right now. Fix it. Change it. You don't like it. If you come out of this unchanged, it means that you're completely comfortable with who you are, and you will never grow, because stagnation equals death.
I like that frame, because I mean, many of the big archetypes in the left-hand path are adversarial, the adversary, the rebel. And it's a recognition of that this quality is, it's the quality that evolves many things. It was the rebellion against, the moral status when the hippies came and the free love movement and things like this evolution of sexual energy that's always shaping, that dragon that's always shape shifting and shedding its skin and taking on new forms. And now with this being more of a time of internal shift, how do we do that and apply that power, that adversary in a healthy way to bring about these changes inside of ourselves, which means we've got to be our own enemy and our own benefactor. I like the root of the word competition is to conspire together. So if we can use the enemy that we're battling as our ally to get ourselves to the next level, instead of going, oh, this is my enemy that I'm fighting, my self-esteem, my weakness, my whatever it is, my negative self-talk, my inability to face that. And I now turn this into a sparring partner, recognizing this is still a part of me. We both have the same objective, but I need to know what that objective is. I need to have the clarity. I need to take the discernment and apply that. And then I need to go battle with myself. I need to take my ritual circle and I need to make that my workshop, my training ground with myself in order to do the work to break out of my current personality, which creates my current reality, and start kind of building a new one, making my progress forward. Very exciting stuff.
Yeah, and part of that is recognizing your limits or recognizing where you've changed. During this whole situation, this has been a perfect time for anybody that has wanted to become more self-disciplined.
Yes.
Now, coming up in February with all this Aquarius energy, it's reminding you, me, everybody that watches this, that individualized self-discipline is the way to go. So you may read something in a book that says, do this 4 times a day at these specific times, and you try it and you're like, well, that's not me, but because of life circumstances, I can fit it in 3 times. Well, that's still going to be more progress than if you don't do it at all. So that's another technique to use, is to say, okay, well, I can make some minor adjustments on these things I read. And I can incorporate them. I can't do it as much as I want to, but it's because I've got X, Y, and Z responsibilities in my life, and they come first.
Yes.
Now, the flip side of that equation is if you're reading all these books that talk about personal discipline and you can't get it together to execute during a time when everybody is forcibly locked down, you're on the wrong path. And I want this recorded because I want to record it saying, yes, I am pointing fingers and saying you're on the wrong path. If you're reading about a path that says it requires a lot of personal discipline and you refuse or can't do the work, accept that you're on the wrong path and find the right one.
I like that.
Because until you find the right one, you're no good to anyone.
That's it. I think there's I forget what there's a specific name for this, which escapes me at the moment, but it's this idea that how people use their spirituality as an escape of dealing with their reality, instead of recognizing that your magic is supposed to be the alchemical chamber by which you go break apart your reality and reconstruct from the ground up, and then you go do the work. I always say that the spell is not done until it's done. So if you're going in the ritual and you're still a part of you left that's still feeling that, you haven't finished the ritual technically. You're still stuck on it. You're still holding on to that part of your personality, that issue. And if you set the dream and you're not finding yourself taking action on it, you still haven't done it. You still haven't finished the work. You still haven't completely sacrificed self or the current limited self on the altar of your ritual magic in order to get to the place where action is the result. Unless physical change through behavior and changes has occurred, the magic's not done. That piece of work's not done. And I say this phrase loosely, but you're intellectually masturbating. You're just, you're making speculations and great philosophies, but you're not willing to taste it in field, in the world. And that's what I love about what you raised here, is about this, the value of being able to contribute at a social level and at the greater social spectrum based upon where you're at. We all have to integrate in society and be contributing members of this world. And I think a lot of people in the left-hand path, they try to almost like avoid that. you know. And I'm like, it's fine to avoid it in the sense of you don't want to be like the herd. But when you're hiding off in a mountain or in a temple and you're not actually making any changes, you've not actually done the work on yourself, because you're not a person that's actually creating change in this world. It's anyone can be enlightened in a, you know, in a yoga retreat. Can you manage that same level of bliss and control in a corporate meeting when the threat? Because if you haven't, you've not made the shift, you know, and you're not doing. And if we're all fundamentally one, because I believe that's one of the reasons magic works, is because we're all technically entangled at a quantum mechanical level. And this fundamental change of ourselves means changing all of ourselves, means evolving all of ourselves. Every plant, every animal, every human, everything ultimately needs to be liberated. And we need to take on a frame of, it's not a me against them. It's we're different. We have completely different approaches. We're different versions of reality, but we're still one force, one entity, one collaborative field that needs to be involved in the alchemy of this planet, you know, to take it to that next level.
Well, and that is the essence of Aquarian energy. Realizing we are all one. And I know a lot of people that are watching this just rolled their eyes when I said that, and I don't care, because we are one. We're one species on one planet. If we're not working together, we are speeding up our destruction.
Fact.
And number two, also understanding that you shouldn't be a conformist. You know, you should look within and say, well, I can contribute here, but I can't really contribute there. So I'm not going to worry about that. Energy flows where attention goes.
Exactly.
And, you know, if people take what I said a few minutes ago to heart and they're like, well, wait a minute, I'm really digging the subject matter, but I don't have the self-discipline. It's not a bad thing to shift gears on the spiritual path. You know, when you start off, you have one idea, but that may only serve a purpose for a few years in your life. And now it's time to come to a new idea. And that is a major part of this Aquarian energy, is adaptation, evolution. We are all, you know, Bill Hicks, the comedian, said it best. We are one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There's no such thing as death. Life is a dream in which we are the imagination of ourselves.
That is golden. That is golden.
And that's something that, yeah, that we could unpack all day long. Yes. But the point here is that this month is the perfect month to address everything that we're talking about right now. Even if you get to the end of the month and you're like, nope, I'm fine where I'm at, you still would have taken all 3 of these weeks to reflect on these points. So really, you're not where you're at. You're a little bit better than you were, and you don't even realize it. See, Aquarius energy is very visionary, and the sign that follows it is Pisces, which is even more visionary. So where we're at the beginning of February is a period of approximately 60 days where the major theme is being a visionary, being innovative, making things happen. Long story short, the beginning of February is giving us a 60-day window where the major theme is being visionary. And that happens on a personal level. What's our vision for ourselves? How are we going to change who and what we are in order to accomplish that? And that's also the macro scale of society at large. How are we going to work together to change the things we don't like? And we got a great example of this just a few days ago with what happened with Reddit and GameStop on Wall Street. That's basically what they did. The heroes of the people right there. You know, that's the attitude. It proved that when we operate together on a big scale like this, we can bring those monolithic institutions to their knees. And there's no reason we should not be doing that on a daily basis. And the left-hand path practitioner says, we should be doing it every chance we get.
Exactly. I also think there's a great hidden lesson here. And I was listening to an investor speak about this exact thing, and he pointed out how it's not a long-term strategy because it's effective, but it happens now once. People are blown away with the phenomena, but unless that action is now going to become strategic, it's not going to necessarily last. And there's an old, it's in the 99 sayings of Hannibal, where Hannibal talks about, the principles of vengeance. And he talks about what's called the motivators of man, and the difference between historically acts of revenge, when one person was completely violated by a country and what brought them to knee, as Hannibal's children pretty much almost brought Rome to its knees completely. That old phrase of the sons of Hannibal. He talked about the principles of revenge and what was actually the difference when people did something for blood versus they did something for love versus they did something for hate. And all of these were short running drives. Whether the drive is justification or whatever, those would always fail. The only time where action was persistent is when it was for honor. How the 74 Ronin suffered through their time of trial because their honor meant more to them. And at the end, they succeeded because they could be rational. They could not be emotionally overwhelmed, not too caught up in their ideas, but still strategic in their actions. And where we now look at this, it's very easy for, I think, people, they get excited because they see this change, or they get rebellious because they see that thing. But they're not taking the time to look at the strategy. They're not aligning the strategy to an internal value system of my honor, my purpose, my fundamental individuality, which is, I think, an energy that's really coming forward in this time. And then making sure that I'm aligned, internally aligned, so that I'm taking precision action, even when I don't feel like it, even when I don't want to do that. Now, what are some other things coming up at us in this month?
So it's basically Aquarius through the week of February, about 16th till about the 22nd. Okay. The reason I single out that week is because the sun changes into Pisces on the 18th and Mercury directs on the 21st. And then even a little bit later on the 25th, Venus moves into Pisces. Oh. Every time you have planets changing signs like that, it causes ripples.
Okay.
So it'll make itself obvious in your life, and the planet tells you how. So for example, every time Venus changes a sign, you might find that you come into an argument with your loved one. Or okay. Every time that Mars changes signs, you might be more accident prone.
Okay.
So the planets dictate kind of how that plays out. But in the span of about a week, we've got all three of those major things that are occurring. So that week, the 16th through about the 23rd or so, 26th, that'll be choppy waters. But after that, we move into Pisces. So we shift from the intellectual component of Aquarius to the compassionate world savior attitude of Pisces.
Okay, that's interesting. But so a question just around that piece. So if we're making a shift with Venus, and this is the same time that we're going direct, could this be indicative that this might be the time where the possibility of new vision, now that we've worked through a bit of that, now we get a bit more clarity on where we want to go?
New vision is a good way to look at it, as well as realizing that maybe the way we handled things was not as compassionate as it could be. Maybe realizing that personal needs sometimes have to be put second to be compassionate towards others. It's the same reason why I didn't really like paying school tax, because I don't have kids, but I never complained because they were still in the neighborhood and I had to see them every day. And kids should have more resources available to them than I had when I was a child.
Yes.
So realizing that too, that you may have to sacrifice a few things, but if it grows in the long run, then you made the right choice. And that comes back to the honor that you were talking about. The problem is a lot of people confuse honor with desire.
Okay, yes.
They think, well, I want to do this. It's the honorable thing to do. No, it's not. It's ego gratification.
There we go. There we go. There we go. And I think this is the difference between actually knowing what your fundamental values are versus where we live in the culture today, which is so instant gratification. You know, people are just
Exactly.
constantly stimulated and they think, oh, this is them. But then the next trend or the next new idea or the next thing comes out. No, that now that's them. That's evidence of a very incongruent or underdeveloped identity, more than anything, and not really the demonstration of somebody who's on this path.
Exactly. Or they think they're on the path, but they're not. Or they think they're on the path, they are on the path, but they're not as far as along as they could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's multiple levels to that. And this month is going to expose a lot of that. And then March following it is going to say, okay, you did all this analysis, you looked at all these changes. Now, how are you going to implement them to better your life and the lives of your loved ones without beating yourself up in the process?
Yes. 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 Well, this is interesting. I was going to question, and this is a bit of a side note there. A lot of people that might be listening to this now are seeing how there's a deeper level, especially what we mentioned earlier, how these retrogrades and these things may not impact you the same way, depending obviously on where these things are in your chart. I know you've been teaching this subject matter for so long. Do you have any kind of recommendations, products, material? Maybe there's something that you teach or a course that just for somebody that's really interested in this, where can they go and learn more about astrology and how this is impacting to identify this?
Well, the good news is there's a lot better resources available now than when I was learning it. I do have a course on handling a Mercury retrograde. It's available on my website, 418ascendant.com. There are a few good books on it. The astrologer Chrissy Blaze writes a really good one on Mercury retrograde, and I like hers because in the back she gives you do's and don'ts and things to avoid and thoughts to consider when you're working with a Mercury retrograde. Gary Caton, another professional astrologer from the States, did the definitive book on Mercury. And it really touches into some hermetics and some magic too, which is why I really like it. It's very comprehensive. I'll do it this way. Instead of promoting more products like that, let's focus on things to avoid.
Okay. That sounds like a good
So
idea.
if you got a favorite astrologer and they're screaming doom and gloom, they are no longer your favorite astrologer.
Good
If
advice.
you go to this website and they say this is the only way to handle a Mercury retrograde, never go back to that website. If you get people that are telling you, well, here's all the problems, but we're not telling you solutions, leave their presence.
That's perfect. I think there's an idea even in old spiritualism that anytime you have real contact with spirit's not going to tell you, oh, everything in your life is going to get messed up in the next week. It'll tell you maybe in the next week it's time to go on a vacation somewhere else or time to look at another area. There's a different the direction of a higher intelligence is usually less of that emotional drama. They don't need that emotional drama because that's a sales pitch drama. You want to condition pain to get a behavioral response instead of actually helping.
Right, exactly. And with the subject matter, what we're talking about and what we both do, we walk that fine line. Because no, we're not having this discussion to scare anybody.
Yes.
We're saying here's solutions, and if you want more, keep checking out what we're doing because we're going to do this party every month.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, that's I think the benefit, like for everyone at home, this is now going to be a regular thing. So every month, if you've got any specific questions and you're listening to this that you'd like to ask myself, you'd like to ask Bill, things of advice that you'd like to see us bring to you, especially because this is going to be the first Wednesday of every month. And we're going to try and give you as much guidance and support to prep you for the month ahead. Bill, maybe in some closing there, are there any, you've given a couple of tools specifically around dealing with the retrograde. Are there any recommended strategies, like closing strategies, and maybe a mindset that you would recommend for people to adopt going into this February? I mean, and with that, I'm actually going to take a bonus steal of a question from you as well. It's Valentine's Day coming up for a lot of people. It's the old Lupercalia. Some people are pro, some people are anti-love. And at the same time, some people are confused. You know, we have different kind of equinoxes and different kind of celebration and festivals, and you know, they're in based upon the country that you're in. Here in the south, Luishnach. On the other side, there's Ibolek. There's all these. Which ones should they celebrate, and why the difference? What's important there? I know that's a bit of a loaded question. If you wouldn't mind kind of tapping into that.
It's all good. So first of all, for strategies, when a Mercury retrograde moment comes up, the best strategy to do is to check your emotions and see what it's telling you. So put your emotions in check, regardless of what you think of it, or regardless of what your emotions say, it's still in your face to deal with.
Yes.
So cool is the rule. The person that cares the least controls the situation the most. So that's strategy number one. It's like a scientific method of thinking is a perfect strategy here. You look at the evidence, you make your decision. You don't go into it with a preconceived notion. And when that evidence reveals itself, you analyze based on what you see. You do not project onto it.
Okay.
Now, as for your other question about the hemispheres of the globe and Valentine's Day, and we've got Imbolc coming up on February 1st or 3rd, depending on how you celebrate it in the Northern Hemisphere. When people are figuring all this out, number one, I'm a big fan of networking with people in your area. So if you're south of the equator, this is Lunasa. I couldn't tell you what Lunasa means in the south of the equator because I've never lived there. But I bet you could find practitioners where you could unveil this more and find out what it means more. This whole confusion started with the early part of the 20th century when everything was Eurocentric and Western European centric at that. Okay. So you've got Gerald Gardner, you've got the Golden Dawn, you got the beginnings of the OTO talking about all of these holy days and these festivals, and then it kind of radiated out to the rest of the planet from there. So that's problem number one, is it's Western European centric, which means it's also Northern Hemisphere centric.
Yes, yes.
So then what that means is you look at that and you say, okay, well, that's the system for the Europeans. That's the system for people north of the hemisphere. We don't have, living south of the hemisphere, we don't have those resources. Let's make our own. I see it as a very kind of Wild West, open-ended frontier right now for people that are living south of the equator, because they're going to find that what's talked about in those northern equator books are limited in significance, and there's not a lot out there otherwise. So let's get it out there.
Yes, exactly.
This is an opportunity for networking. This is an opportunity for mass ritual work on various continents synchronized at the same time, like Catholic priests do their prayers. This is a real opportunity to maximize it.
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of the day, you're supposed to be coming into tune with the currents as they are relevant to your country and to your culture, and not just adapting the others, because if you can probably tune into that, but you're not going to get the same level of benefit. You're not going to harness the frequencies that are so richly available to that. I mean, to perform a winter festival in the summertime, it doesn't make logical sense. And you're getting obsessed with an ideology instead of with a discovery of the currents of energy that are currently present inside of yourself. So then just a closing question around that. How does these two celebrations in the respective hemispheres, what impact, if any, are they going to have, or can we capitalize on in order to make this process a bit more effective for us?
Well, Mr. Psychic, I just covered that in my temple service Sunday, but long story short, what Imbolc and Lunasa have in common is an emphasis on the sun. So an emphasis on that solar light, an emphasis on the light of divinity. So regardless of where you are on the globe, coming up, February 1st or 3rd, whichever you celebrate, it's time to anchor that light. In the South, it's more reflecting on how the light has come, what you learned from it, and how you can use it going forward. In the North, it's connecting with it after a long, cold winter. But there's still that central column thread of light, whether it's the sun, whether it's the spiritual light, however you define it. This upcoming holy day is all about the sun.
I like that. And again, the sun is the classic symbol of the higher self. We spoke about honor and discovering the individual nature. And there's a teaching that I've always kind of lived by and taught myself in my own workshops, where I say that if you're looking at influence, at a goal or an objective, if you want to increase the range that you're going to get, consider the benefit, not just to yourself, but to other people and to the community. The greater the benefit is to the whole, the greater the amount of force you're going to gather, because you're going to have an automatic rapport with people that you meet with this aligned vision. So, when we're coming to, and this again closes so nicely everything that we chatted about today, in that, where that conjunction is taking us, what stage we're going through now with this intellectual balancing act, if we will, to get us out of the mind and start really rethinking those things through and aligning this to our honor, to our purpose, but not just our purpose as individuals, but our purpose as a people, as a community, and our place in the larger collective community for that. I think this has been a very powerful thing, and thank you. Well, I want to chat more about these equinoxes, so I hope in our next session we get to go into them a little bit more detail.
Well, so actually, so for the next conversation in March, this I'm going to throw this out there, not just for you, but for anybody watching this. March has an equinox, so this will come up again. But in the northern hemisphere, it's considered spring equinox. But in the southern, I guess it's autumn equinox.
Yes.
So the common theme is balance, but those two are just about polar opposites. So then the next time we do this, we'll discuss the intricacies and the nuances, because these are actual equinoxes and solstices are astronomical as much as they are anything else, whereas Imbolg and Lunasa are more a mental construct. So we'll really get more into the scientific side of things in March.
I think that's very interesting, because again, one of the big principles in the path is the unification of the dualities. And, I think that would be for everyone a very interesting discussion in terms of how those dualities. I'll bring some stuff from the South, bring some stuff from the North, and
we'll meet in the middle.
We'll meet in the middle. For everybody listening, I will make sure that in the link to this video, as well as in the podcast, as well as on Spotify, that there is a link to the service that Bill was referring to, so you can go get a listen to more detail on that, as well as the rest of our usual links. And I think that's where we'll stop it for today. Everybody, this is an ongoing thing, so please do email us. Email me at info@thecult.co.za, or comment on this video wherever you're listening. Any questions you have for our up and coming session, or anything that we might have touched on today that you'd like to learn more about, please just let us know, and we will make sure that we bring that up in future discussions. Bill, I want to thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute honor and a pleasure sharing space with you again in this cyber world of ours today. And I hope we're going to see a lot more of that energy. You and I've got a couple of things planned, which is exciting, but I'm going to hold it off from everybody else until we're ready to reveal that news.
No, as always, it's been great chatting with you, man. I love our chats.
It's been good. Bill, have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you again in our next session.
Sounds good, man. Have a good one. Hey family, it's Adam Knox here. Thanks for supporting this podcast and these ideas. I really appreciate
free thinkers, like yourselves, that are willing to challenge conventional norms and think for themselves and take on new challenges and look at new ideas. And as such, I want to say that if you haven't yet, if you are looking at ways to improve your knowledge over the entire field, and you're looking at a regular feed of ideas and concepts to keep improving yourself, I'd like to invite you to sign up at the Cult of You. All my teachings and all my ideas are there for only $19 a month, and every month I bring you a completely new section of some of the most cutting ideas, and I'm constantly adding to that. So I'm constantly reviewing and adding more knowledge as I gain them, and you'll see a lot of the interviews and a lot of things that I do extend on some of the subjects that I cover inside of those areas. I do take quite a bit of effort to make sure that the filming is also quite good, and to give you not just a demonstration of rituals, but also talk you through the psychology behind them so that you're empowered to do them. And I cover every subject under the sun, from science to art to magic to all the different systems out there, from the Golden Dawn to the Western traditions to the Left Hand Path traditions. We discuss technology and technomancy. We discuss sex magic and seduction. We discuss so much more, from purely the mental aspects to how do you deal with the darkness when it comes up, as well as how do you take those things into business and into your romantic life, as well as what are the keys to make your magic work, as well as to unlock different degrees of spirituality. So if you haven't yet, please consider signing up at the Cult of You, and you'll be able to send me a mail and message there, and I'll be there to help you personally through mail correspondence and chat you and guide you through the entire process. And if you make it through the first year of the entire cycle and you graduate to the second year of the program, you're able to have direct sessions with myself and some of the members of my temple. And I look forward to helping you whether you go that route or not. Please keep enjoying these podcasts. Please share them with people that you think they're going to find value in them. Like and subscribe to the show. And please send me your messages to info@thecultofyou. I would love to hear what are things that are important to you. What are ideas and concepts that this raised? Maybe this inspired you. Maybe this made sense to you. Maybe this opened up something. I'd love to hear that. Please talk to me and please share with me. Write in the comments and give me your ideas and concepts. If you're watching this on the YouTube channel, if you're only watching this on the YouTube channel, please head on over to Spotify and do subscribe. And if you're listening to this on Spotify, go check us out on YouTube. But please share these ideas and these concepts, and let's have a conversation. I'd love to hear from you. That's it for me. I'm Adam Knox. This is the Cult of You, and remember, live deliciously.